debacle of jail yard, prison ball, rugby, NFL football. They're like, it looked like offensive line versus defensive line. It looked like you was doing the Oklahoma drill in football practice.
Nobody is talking about it, but the WNBA may have just made a move that could shift the entire league overnight. Behind the headlines about rising salary caps and charter flights, there are growing claims that billionaire ownership groups are exerting stronger influence over officiating and league operations. Some observers argue this represents a broader corporate intervention, one that could reshape how the game is regulated on the court. For years, critics have pointed to inconsistent officiating and a more physical style of play, suggesting that the league allowed a rough, sometimes overly aggressive product to persist without strict oversight. Now, with increased financial stakes, expanding media deals, and a surge in global attention, driven in part by the arrival of a high-profile, game-changing talent from Iowa, the pressure to protect the league's most valuable assets has intensified. This moment is being framed by some as a turning point, a shift away from the older, more physical identity of the league toward a more controlled, commercially optimized version of the sport. Whether or not these claims fully reflect reality, the underlying idea is clear. Greater investment often brings tighter governance, and the balance between competition, entertainment, and corporate interests is now under sharper scrutiny than ever before.
But one of the major issues is, what the hell is going on with these referees, man? This was prison last year. Caitlyn Clark looked like she was out there on the yard going against a bunch of goons. I'm just being honest with you.
The situation being described reflects a highly critical view of how physical play and officiating were handled, particularly in games involving Caitlyn Clark. From this perspective, she appeared to face an unusually intense level of physical defense on a national stage, with repeated contact that some felt went insufficiently penalized. Critics argue that officiating inconsistencies may have allowed veteran players to push the limits of physicality, while calls at times seem to go against the league's most marketable emerging star. This has fueled a broader concern about whether the league is effectively balancing competitiveness with a need to protect players' safety and its most valuable on-court assets. Adding to the tension is a perception of inconsistency from segments of the coaching establishment, where public messaging about fairness and player protection does not always align with what some observers believe is happening during games.
Officiating came under scrutiny when Minnesota Lynx coach Cheryl Reeve was ejected in Game 3 of the semifinals against the Phoenix Mercury. She then excoriated the league's officiating in her post-game news conference, drawing a suspension for Game 4. And
the argument highlights what some see as a striking inconsistency in how physical play and officiating were addressed throughout the season. From this perspective, coaches like Cheryl Reeve and Stephanie White were perceived as largely silent, while Caitlyn Clark faced heavy defensive pressure and frequent contact, raising concerns among critics about player protection and officiating standards. However, when similar levels of physicality appeared to impact established veterans, particularly in situations involving players like Nafisa Collier and Alyssa Thomas, the response from the coaching side became far more vocal and public. This contrast has been interpreted by some observers as a reflection of tension within the league, where competitive dynamics, player hierarchy, and officiating consistency intersect, ultimately drawing increased scrutiny from stakeholders, media, and those invested in the league's growth and governance.
Any groundbreaking changes in officiating, but it does include that the union will be given access to any informational, educational, and point of emphasis videos regarding officiating, and it requires 3 meetings per season between the league and the union.
The provision being described is framed as a major shift in how officiating is monitored and evaluated under the new collective bargaining agreement. While it is publicly presented as an effort to improve transparency, some interpret it as a stronger form of centralized oversight driven by team ownership and league stakeholders. The requirement for multiple in-depth review sessions focused on flagrant and technical fouls suggests a more structured and data-driven approach to evaluating referee performance. Rather than informal feedback, these reviews could function as formal accountability checkpoints, with greater access to game footage and clearer standards for enforcement. In this view, the goal is to create a more consistent and controlled officiating environment, one that better aligns with the league's growing financial stakes and emphasizes players' safety, competitive fairness, and the protection of its most valuable on-court talent.
Look, it's too much money being spent now for the stars to be hurt. It's too much money put in this league for Caitlyn Clark to be sitting out because y'all out there playing prison ball. It's too much money in this league for Nafisa Collier to be out because Alyssa Thomas thinks she's Derrick Henry from the Baltimore Ravens.
The argument frames the current WNBA landscape as a decisive shift driven by high-level economic forces, where major stakeholders in the global sports market are focused less on internal locker room dynamics and more on measurable output, revenue generation, and audience demand. From this perspective, the influx of capital and major broadcasting investments has raised the stakes significantly, making it increasingly unacceptable for inconsistent officiating or excessive physical play to negatively impact the league's most valuable stars, particularly Caitlyn Clark. The concern being emphasized is that broadcasters and sponsors are investing in a fast-paced, high-efficiency style of play, highlighted by transition offense and long-range shooting, and expect a product that maximizes entertainment value and minimizes avoidable disruptions such as injuries or inconsistent rule enforcement. At the same time, teams like the Indiana Fever are experiencing unprecedented demand, with larger venues and expanded exposure reflecting the league's growing commercial appeal. This environment naturally increases pressure on officiating standards and league governance to ensure a fair, safe, and consistent product. While the original argument presents this shift in extreme terms, the underlying reality is a broader transition. As financial investment and global visibility increase, so does a need for structured oversight, clearer rules, and a style of play that aligns with both competitive integrity and business expectations.